Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you today about the revision of PAS 2050. I'm going to just start with a very brief slide about BSI, the British Standards Institution. We are the UK's national standards body, but we are also a member of ISO, and in that role we represent UK interests within ISO. So as well as working on PAS 2050, we're also providing the UK route for comments into the development of ISO 14067 on product carbon footprinting. So we're involved with this from two quite distinct angles. On this slide, you can just see a few of the standards that we've been involved with over the years. PAS 2050 is on that list. Another one to draw your attention to is PAS 2060, which is a specification for declarations of carbon neutrality. And that was a standard that we developed in the early days of developing PAS 2050. A lot of organisations were saying to us, actually, can you look at this as well, please? So we've done that piece of work, and that document is actually available from BSI as well. I just wanted to draw your attention to that. So moving on, looking at PAS 2050, this was originally published in 2008 and was sponsored by the Carbon Trust and the UK Government Department for Environment, Defra. I'm sure you're all fairly aware of what this standard does. It's about assessing the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of products, and by products we mean goods and services. It purely provides the assessment methodology, and it ensures that you can apply a consistent approach to assessing greenhouse gas emissions, so you can make comparisons between products, or you can make a comparison about your improvement over time. It has been referred to, as we've already heard today, in the development of other international standards. And before we actually started the revision, we at BSI, when we publish a standard, we have an obligation to go back and actually look at that standard again and make sure that it's still fit for purpose. Before we actually embarked on the revision of PAS 2050, we went back to the large number of people who were actually using the document and asked them what they thought. A few surprising facts. We realised that it was being used globally, and actually the original PAS 2050 was developed with an international stakeholder group. So we knew there was an appetite for it globally. About a third of the usage is within the UK, a third within the rest of Europe, and about a third within the rest of the world. So it was clearly being used. There was a need for it to be used internationally. We also asked people what they thought needed changed within the standard. We wanted to produce an improved standard when we embarked on the revision. And one interesting factor that came out is the difficulty that you face trying to produce a generic standard on product carbon footprinting that can be applied to all different types of products and services. And a very clear message came back from the over 1,000 respondents to our survey saying, we need to somehow accommodate this, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. Another big important piece of feedback for us was about the fact that it's incredibly difficult to do this type of activity, and any additional guidance or clarity that we could bring during the revision process would be very welcome. So these factors have been taken into account during the revision. The other thing that we did ask as well was what benefits people had realised from using PAS 2050. This is an interesting slide because reducing greenhouse gas emissions is not the top benefit, and I think I would have probably expected it to be up there at number one, but it's actually a better understanding of the organisation's processes, and this is something that we see a lot with best practice standards. There is often an immediate benefit from a better understanding of your processes and your supply chain. So perhaps not quite so surprising. I think the other thing that's interesting about this slide is the top three benefits are not related to, or directly related to, communication of the end result, whereas the ones that are sort of lower down, route to becoming carbon neutral or improving the image of our organisation or increased sales, are directly related to communication. And I think it's very encouraging for us to see that, because when we originally worked on the standard, one of the objectives was to make sure that it was usable for exactly those top reasons. It's not necessarily about communicating the end result, it's actually about finding process efficiencies and reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, and none of that actually requires you to go ahead and report those results. So for us, that was quite a revealing bit of feedback from the survey. So this slide just summarises some of the benefits that I've already mentioned, and I think at this point it is worth saying, and I think this is something that we've already heard a little bit this morning, that carbon is actually not the only impact that we need to be considering. And I just wanted to mention at this stage about the water footprinting work that's happening within ISO. I'm not sure if it's actually on the programme to be discussed this week, but there is an international standard under development on water footprinting, so more information on that will be forthcoming at some point. So the revision itself, these are the objectives that we had when we embarked on the revision. And I think at this stage, I need to say thank you very much to the UK government departments who sponsored this revision. Defra and Maureen is here today were the driving force behind this and very, very supportive and actually sponsored the revision. We also had support from the UK Government Department for Energy and Climate Change and also the Department for Business Innovation Services. Now, although it is a UK-sponsored standard, it is not a UK standard. Again, we made every effort to engage an international audience in the revision of this standard. Roughly speaking, the stages that we go through, we did the initial research, we used that to actually inform the priority areas we wanted to look at. We brought together a steering group. There are a number of people in the audience today who were on that steering group, and thank you very much to you for your patience and your time. Through various stages of drafting, we then put the document out for public comment, and then the document was then published at the end of September this year. So what we really set out to do is to clarify some of the ambiguities that became apparent. I think PAS 2050, when it was first published, was quite groundbreaking, and I think we knew that there were going to be some issues with it, so we really wanted to just iron out some of those ambiguities and to really take advantage of the extensive user base out there and really feed on their knowledge to improve the standard and reflect their experiences as much as possible. We also wanted to ensure that more people use the standard. And we also wanted to make sure that we took account of other international developments. We've already heard about the GHG work from the WRI and also the work within ISO. So we wanted to make sure that we harmonised our efforts with those activities. Now, this slide shows you some of the details of the changes, and I'm not going to go into them. They're extremely technical. We have produced a document on our website that identifies clause by clause the changes to PAS 2050. It also provides the rationale for those changes. I'm not going to attempt to cover them, but I am going to talk about the last item on this list, which is about provisions for supplementary requirements. Please go to our website and have a look at the other technical changes that we've mentioned here. There is a document on there, as I say, but I'm going to skip straight to supplementary requirements. And this goes back to the piece of research that we did that identified the fact that the one-size-fits-all standard, it simply doesn't work. It's too complicated. And if you think about one particular example that illustrates this is around allocation of emissions to co-products. And the original PAS, the default was to do this on the basis of economic allocation. And that is still the case in the current PAS, but in that particular clause, it says if a particular product group or industry wants to go away and actually devise a method by consensus that suits them better, they can do that, and that will be recognised as a supplementary requirement under the PAS. I think it's a huge challenge with this particular area to provide a method that ensures consistency and comparability of results, but that allows the flexibility for it to be applied across a broad range of products and services. And our way of dealing with that is to support the development of supplementary requirements for particular industry sectors or product groups. So the PAS itself actually has a series of requirements of how these supplementary requirements should be developed, and the first half of this slide really shows what we mean by that. They should be supplementary. They shouldn't conflict or duplicate requirements within the PAS. They should actually supplement them. They should be broadly recognised. They should be developed on a consensus-based approach, scoped appropriately, harmonised, etc. You can read the rest of what's on that first half of the slide. And there are specific points within the PAS where it refers to the development of supplementary requirements, and these are all listed on the bottom half of the slide. So you can see there are quite a few fairly difficult and taxing areas where the PAS makes provision for specific industry sectors to go away and develop their own requirements if they do it in accordance with the top half of the slide. Now, the objective here is to try and be inclusive of existing work in this area, and obviously PCRs is something that needs to be considered, and it's entirely expected that they can form a supplementary requirement or supplementary requirements to the PAS. But we would hope that this brings a bit of clarity and actually encourages industry sectors to get out there and actually come to an agreement about some of the assumptions that they have to make in implementing product carbon footprinting. Just one example of a project that we're currently working on. This is PAS 2051, and this is some work we're doing with an organisation in the Netherlands to develop supplementary requirements for the horticulture industry. Again, this is an international process. The standard will be used internationally. We're engaging, I think it's about 200 organisations globally on this. It's currently available on our website. It's actually at the public consultation stage at the moment, so again, please go and have a look at that and see what you think and get back to us with any feedback. It will be published before the end of this year. We're also speaking to a number of other industry sectors about helping them develop supplementary requirements, and if anyone is interested in talking to me about that a little bit more, please come and find me later on today. So just to summarise, these are my contact details. Please get in touch if you have any queries about this. Our website has got a vast amount of information on it. We've already mentioned the comparison document with the GHG Protocol Product Standard. We also have the summary of changes on there. We also have the guidance document, which actually really is an incredibly good document. The PAS itself is very technical. The guidance document really helps you understand exactly what you have to do. That is still in the process of being revised at the moment, and the new version of that will be available within the next couple of weeks. So I would recommend that you get hold of a copy of that. And I think that was all I had to say. So I will hand over to Maureen, who's going to do the second half of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As usual, I think Rasmus wants me to gallop through my presentation because I think we're short of time. Is that right? I think it is. I looked at my watch, so I think we're quite short. Katherine has covered a lot of things. I'm not going to speak really about the PAS 2050, except insofar as to indicate how it relates to what we see as the future progression of policy in the area of life cycle assessment of environmental impacts in product supply chains. It's already been mentioned. We do, it's the other way. That's it. It's not just about carbon. Our emphasis is not, in the UK, obviously most of our work thus far has been on carbon, but we're now stepping up our work, for example, on water and biodiversity. And our policy thinking has always been and will continue to be grounded in our aim to guide the market towards more sustainable products and consumption, including more efficient and sustainable use of resources. The UK experience in relation to assessment of carbon emissions has naturally been largely influenced by PAS 2050. And I thought it might be useful just to flag up here the rationale behind the original PAS 2050, because I think it still is very valid. And I think Katherine just mentioned this. Why did people, in the survey we did, why did people actually want to do, what benefit did they derive from the PAS? They wanted to understand their supply chains, they wanted to measure their impacts, they wanted to manage and reduce their emissions, and they wanted to share information about their work internally with their supply chains and with customers. So they were looking for something that would give them a methodology for measuring greenhouse gases that could be applied to a wide range of products and services across the supply chain, bring consistency, and you're going to hear me repeat that a lot today, and provide a basis for comparability to supply chain measurement of greenhouse gases across different markets. So the lessons we learned, and as Katherine has alluded to, I think, generally, but the more precise lessons that we took away from the evaluation exercise that we did once the PAS had first been issued was data, the availability and the accessibility of data, the relevance to a particular sector or product group, whether or not it would allow for comparison, and also communication issues. Regarding the second of these, the sector and product group relevance, Katherine, I think, has already given you quite a lot of detail on that, and I don't intend to go over that, although I had some information here. This was something that users felt very strongly about, and as you can see, it's something which we have introduced. There's a new element of supplementary requirements in the PAS, which equates more or less, in many respects, to what is more commonly known within the area as PCRs, but slightly more elaborated on that. Sorry, I meant to go back on that. Again, I mentioned about the use of being consistent. We also felt that if you're going to have, as it were, sector-specific rules, which are going to underpin, as it were, the generic standard, those rules in themselves or guidance also need to be consistent. Otherwise, you lose the certainty that is brought to a standard. And we also felt that the expertise for developing anything at the sector or product level best lies with the industry. They know what's needed. They know the best sources for getting the data. So business wanted a consistent and reproducible set of approach to measuring greenhouse gas emissions. And why did they want that? They didn't want it they wanted it to identify emission hotspots and also to decide how best to address the issue of reducing and removing those emissions. And our focus in government is very much at reducing the impacts. That's what we're looking for. We want businesses to take action. And they wanted something that could provide a basis for assessing improvement in their environmental performance over time. And at the same time, and as perhaps a natural consequence of having gone through the process of carrying out a carbon footprint, there was an interest in sharing that information. For some people, the interest was just in sharing the information internally. So this would be, for example, to inform decisions on investment, for example, to tackle hotspots and improve environmental performance, or to compare performance over time. Others saw potential marketing opportunity, either directed to suppliers or to consumers. In both cases, these would inform purchasing decisions, and in relation to consumers, possibly lead to behavior change. And some, of course, thought of sharing that information perhaps through labeling, product labeling. Now, we don't have a problem in principle with the provision of information. In fact, we see providing information as a very useful tool for actually raising awareness. And that we see as perhaps a crucial step in bringing about change in behavior, such as purchasing patterns. However, providing information and raising awareness is one thing. It's getting the reaction that's perhaps most important, and particularly the desired reaction. So, for example, if carbon footprint information is to be used internally by a business, say to make investment decisions, then the decision makers within the organization will need to have trust in the information being given to them. And similarly, if carbon footprinting information is being conveyed to consumers with the aim of influencing their purchasing decisions, in effect as a marketing tool, then consumers need to have confidence that the information they're being given is correct. So credibility is therefore key. So any environment claim, and I'm using that in the broadest sense, so that's any means of passing on information about environmental credentials, must be credible. And that's to enable business investors to have confidence and also to encourage trust in consumers in making their decisions. So in the UK, many years ago, we first drew up a Green Claims Code and Guidance, which established some core principles for making an environmental claim, because we saw even at that stage the value of making a good claim, as it were. And we brought out something called, we have actually updated quite recently our Green Claims Guidance, and that restates the principles that were in the original code. So the content of the claim should be relevant, reflect a genuine benefit to the environment, should be presented clearly and accurately, and all claims must be capable of being substantiated with robust evidence. I just was going to say that on the back table, there are a few copies of our Green Claims Guidance and also a quick sheet, a quick guide sheet. So I just give a little plug to that for Defra. But there are very few copies, and they are available on the website. So referring back to the two main issues raised by the users of PAS, which was the evaluation, what do we need to do, and what should possibly be the future direction of policy, Comparability and communication were seen as something that we needed to be focusing on. And we also recognize that an organization having done a carbon footprint is likely to want to communicate it at some stage. So we consider that to make credible claims about environmental performance and facilitate comparability, consistency in the approach to assessment is crucial. Indeed, this was the gap, I think, that PAS 2050 originally sought to fill when it was first published in 2008. It was with the aim of bringing consistency. And I think, we can say it's been fairly successful, as Katherine has outlined, in terms of gaining international recognition and usage. Well, now, of course, we have a number of other international initiatives for the assessment of environmental impacts in the supply chain. Some of them are focused on just single impacts of GHG emissions, such as the GHG Protocol Product Standard, and others cover a number of impacts, such as the French Grenelle. So taking all of that into account and the lessons learned from the evaluation of PAS 2050, we think that the future considerations for LCA development of environmental impacts in the supply chain will need to be global application, a common assessment approach, consistency, which I put in capitals, practicality and relevance, comparability, and post-assessment communication. The first of these, the global application, we think is crucial. We are working in a very much a global marketplace with increasingly complex international supply chains. And work is already being done in this, which has been facilitated by this forum, for example, and also the French work that it's doing, the Sustainability Consortium, at the European level, the ILCD handbook, which includes a database, and in various other international fora. The one caveat we see and which we would flag up is the need to avoid duplication of effort. It's a very big issue that we're all dealing with here, and I think it's crucial that we work together and try and, as I say, avoid duplication. This leads me on to the common assessment approach. We need to work to get alignment. If you've got too many standards, it causes confusion and can lead to a lack of consistency. And we worked, for example, very closely with our colleagues on the GHG Protocol and PAS. We recognized that they were both, in terms of quantification, they are generic standards, as it were. And so, as Cynthia has already referred, we've jointly produced a fact sheet which will respond to the question that's already been raised to the floor. What is the difference, or are they interchangeable? Now, the idea behind that was, when we go on to the underpinning rules at a sector level that you might want to use, my personal vision was that there should be an ability to use, when industry gets together and comes up with some, whatever we call them, supplementary requirements they're referred to in the PAS. I think the GHG protocol refers to them as product rules. Whatever industry comes up with, in effect, they should be suitable to underpin either of the standards in terms of the quantification elements of the GHG protocol standard, and obviously the PAS is just quantification. However, consistency is the key to all of this and needs to be maintained throughout all stages of the process. So we see, for example, the ILCD database, which is being developed by the JRC, as being a very useful tool in this. And data has been flagged up as being a big headache. When most people set out to do a footprint, data, lack of it, accessibility to it has been flagged up as a big issue and a barrier perhaps to people using and conducting the footprint. So we see great potential in the work that's been done in the ILCD to deliver guidance and support for doing this and maintaining consistency at the international level. Practicality and relevance, we think, is also very important. PAS is a generic standard. It does need to be underpinned. Quite frankly, there's no point in having a standard if nobody's using it, so it defeats the object. So, and our aim is to guide business to reduce emissions. That's our overriding ambition in government, is to reduce emissions, and you need to be able to measure, to manage, as has already been said. So internationally, you need agreement to bring consistency at the sector level. So, for example, it's been flagged up that one way you could use the sector-specific rules would be to point businesses to reliable data sets that had been agreed within the business as being being qualified and quality controlled in some way, so that people wouldn't be searching around which data sets shall we use. And also the point of certain aspects of the generic standards which need to be adapted or need to be made more relevant, and Katherine has all mentioned allocation as being one. Now, this won't overcome all uncertainties. I think we need, and I think the English are known for this, to be pragmatic. We can't overcome the inherent uncertainty in the whole process of undertaking carbon footprinting. So I think what we need to do is to not try and seek ultimate perfection in this, but to work and try to come up with, at sector level, where the generic standards need a bit of adjustment and to be more relevant, work there to bring a consistency and make them more practical and therefore more attractive and more usable by sectors and product groups. Then again, the comparability. In order to do comparison, you need to have consistency. You need to compare apples with apples and not apples with pears. So we need to, again, this is where you need the consistency both in any underpinning rules and also in the generic standards themselves. And then post-assessment communication. The PAS 2050 covers just the quantification of greenhouse gas emissions, but we do recognize that people, having gone to the trouble of, as I said before, of doing a carbon footprint, they will be interested in communicating it. So, and we say, we would suggest that a good way of doing this is to take on board the code that we have and the guidance that we've put out, which is all about claims and which certainly at the European level is governed by the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. And the Commission, I think we heard this morning, is looking quite closely at how communication is being done within Europe. So that will have an impact on how people address these issues of communication. So I think the future direction, in summary, will be we're moving away from a one-size-fits-all, so the generic standards are fine. They've provided the framework. They've certainly PAS 2050 has been out there. We've had an opportunity to evaluate it. Our objective is to change behavior. We see in terms of getting people to reduce their emissions, that is our primary focus. And then we need to improve communication. You need greater credibility, which in turn we feel will lead to better awareness, an incentive to improve performance, stimulate design, and change behaviors. And I think this will only be achieved by using and/or delivering the 3 C's: consistency, credibility, and collaboration. Thank you.